Hey guys, Viking Reefing here. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen that I've acquired a new Moorish idol. Since getting it, I've been quite flooded with care-related questions about these guys. I do have a care guide on my YouTube channel, which I uploaded years back. It was one of the first videos I ever made, so it was quite low quality. I guess we can call this iteration version 2.0. Firstly, I have to apologize for the state of this tank. As you can see, there are some patches of cyano scattered about. The bubble tips, they've quite overgrown the rockwork, and there's heaps of Asterina starfish in here as well. You've probably seen that I will be moving in a couple of months, so I will be breaking down my entire reef system, and honestly, I just haven't been too motivated to carry out any in-depth maintenance of my tanks. The Asterina starfish is actually quite an interesting example, since I do have a fair bit of an infestation going on here. They actually keep the glass pretty clean, so I hardly even have to scrape the glass in this tank. And most Asterinas are fairly benign, so they don't go with the corals. One interesting tidbit is also that there's tons of them in here. I don't have a single one in my big tank, and I don't have any harlequin shrimp or anything like that in there. So something's obviously eating them. I guess it's probably one of the angels. And another point I would like to make is that this is strictly a holding tank for this guy. I'm conditioning it here, so he will be nice, fat and happy when he moves into his new home, which will be a much bigger tank in my new place. This is a Nice Opus 300, which obviously isn't suited long-term for an idol. I don't have too many fish in here, and I think he will be fine for the foreseeable future, like 3 months. But I would really not keep an idol in this size tank for any prolonged periods of time. My idea with this guy is also that him, the copper band, and a similar Vartis butterfly will be the first new inhabitants into the new tank. Just so they can get situated before I release my much bigger and much more aggressive, I guess, angels. So they have the best chance of success to really get established before the big bullies enter the tank. But anyways, let's get into the topic of this video. How do you take care of a Moorish idol? Well, firstly, even now, these guys have a terrible reputation about being near impossible to keep. Something I brought up in my last video is that there was a study done, I believe in England, and I believe they've tracked, I think it was 200 Moorish idols that was bought from fish shops and brought home to hobbyists. After, I believe it was 1 year, all of them had perished. So given the abysmal track record of that study and just general reputation of Moorish idols in the hobby, is this even a fish that we should be attempting to keep? My personal experience is that these guys aren't particularly difficult, really. I kept one a long time ago. I believe I kept it for about 5 years. I sold when I broke down a tank. I kept another one for 3 years before it basically spooked itself somehow, swam face first into a rock and basically just killed itself, freak accident. And I've kept 2 more Moorish idols apart from those. One of them I believe I kept for about 3 or 4 months before my very aggressive Achilles tang unfortunately injured it to the point where it perished a couple of weeks later. And the last one I tried to keep, that poor guy lasted a few weeks in my main display tank. What kind of happened was that I did use an acclimation box, everything was looking good, but unfortunately the freaking goldflake angel started chasing it. That happens fairly regularly because that's an aggressive fish, but it usually just dies down in a couple of days. And I was quite sure that the Moorish idol could handle it. unfortunately it didn't, so it basically succumbed to stress. One thing that all these fish has had in common is that they have been very easy to get feeding. I'd probably say that this guy is the one that was the most challenging, so to speak. But after, say, like a week or two, they've all been feeding on both pellets and flake foods. They are notorious for being bad eaters, and that's something that we are going to be addressing in this video. I reached out on my Instagram account and asked you guys to give me some of your questions so I could answer this in this video. One of you asked a very interesting question and wished me to detail basically my entire process from acquisition to having a thriving idol long term. So we'll start with that. In terms of acquiring an idol, there are two main localities where you can get Moorish idols from these days. You used to be able to get them from Hawaii as well, but it's basically Kenya and the Philippines, perhaps Indonesia as well. I personally would avoid all Moorish idols coming out of the Philippines. Not that there's any particular thing wrong with the fish itself. It's just seems to be a much longer supply chain and the fish aren't as well kept. So you'll probably have a much lower success rate if you go for a Filipino Moorish idol versus one that's caught from Kenya. So I would be very diligent in terms of knowing the point of origin of the fish when you buy a Moorish idol. My LFS, for example, he only brings them in from Kenya, and they always do well, or at least they do well to 90%. Looking at the fish, if you know that it's a Kenyan Moorish idol, you're in the LFS, you're looking at the fish, make sure that it doesn't have any like big lesions or anything. One other thing that you should really be watching out for is pinching, behind the eyes. If it's pinched behind the eyes, it probably means that it's been without food for quite some time in the supply chain. These things don't do well if food is being withheld for any prolonged periods of time. I would also look at feeding response. It doesn't necessarily have to feed with like utter gusto or something, but at least you need to make sure that it's interested in food, that it's checking it out. And obviously you want to check for like just standard things. No really rapid breathing. If you can find one without any ick, white spot, that would be ideal. But in my opinion, they can handle ick quite readily. I've never had any issues with that. And you don't want to buy the really big Moorish idols, nor do you want to buy the really small ones that are almost like penny-sized. Stay away from both those. If you get the really small ones, chances are that they've taken quite a beating through the supply chain because, well, the smaller the fish, the smaller their fat reserves are, and you basically have less of a buffer. If you get a really, really big fish, the issue with those guys is that they can be hard to convert to prepared foods because they're more set in their ways. In my opinion, if you really want to succeed with a Moorish idol, you should have a dedicated conditioning tank for them. I do have a full video in terms of how I QT fish. I never do any prophylactic treatment of them, especially not with like copper and stuff like that, because copper is basically like dosing chemo or something. But I have a separate reef tank from my main system where I place new fish for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, I want to be able to catch any diseases or parasites. For example, the ones that I'm the most worried about is velvet and uronema, and also flukes, which is easily addressed if you just freshwater dip them a bunch of times. But the other main reason is so that they can have a fairly calm and relaxed entry into aquarium life. A newly acquired Moorish idol will probably not really eat that well, and they will need time to really get into the groove of things. But at the same time, they have a huge need for food. Moorish idols, they burn through nutrients and food like nothing else I've ever seen. So for example, if I were to plonk this guy into my big display tank that has like, I believe it's 5 or 6 angelfish, a bunch of antheas, some tanks and stuff. He was eating when I got him. However, it took him ages. So he would have starved in like 3 or 4 days in my big tank probably. And it would also have been stress all to hell with all the big angels and stuff. So that would definitely also lessen the chances of him really settling in and starting feeding properly. Once I got this guy, the only thing he was feeding on was frozen mysis. I believe he ate around 1.5 cubes per day from day one. However, he was such a slow feeder initially. So it took him, I'd probably say 30 to 40 minutes to consume 1.5 cubes of mysis. So you can just imagine that if you have a bunch of other aggressive feeders, he would hardly get a morsel of that. So a separate conditioning tank is, I'd probably say, almost vital to stabilize these guys before throwing them into a well-populated reef system. Usually they are a bit more aggressive in terms of feeding compared to this guy. However, there are some people who has had real difficulty in getting them feeding. I believe it's a combination in terms of just, well, damage from the supply chain, stress from other inhabitants, and perhaps the wrong choices of foods. My first go-to, if I have a very picky fish, which is a benthic feeder, such as a Moorish idol, angelfish, or what have you, is that I smear mastic on the rocks, which promotes their natural grazing behavior. That usually works. If that doesn't work, live blackworms can be an option. One thing I found, which can generally be quite readily accepted, it's not a good food long term, but it's bloodworms, the stuff that you feed freshwater fish. As I've spoken about before, these guys really don't handle stress all that well. So if you are trying to introduce them into a very busy tank with boisterous fish, my advice to you would be to section off a piece of that tank with like egg crate or acrylic, and keep the Moorish idol in there for a good month or so, all the other fish are used to it and they won't hassle it too much when you remove the actual divider. I hope that kind of covered the acquisition phase of a Moorish idol. Let's get into some other just general care tips and requirements of these guys. One thing that you fairly often see is that someone says that I had a Moorish idol, it was doing fine for a while, then it just stopped feeding and withered away. Personally, look at that guy, he's even trying to bite on the freaking top lid's tank cover, because I guess there's some small pieces of like flake foods up there. But however, it's a common thing to see these guys wither away, and my guess it's one of the main culprits of that is that you have been feeding them too much protein, basically. So that 80% of their diet consists of stuff like mysis, brine shrimp, and all that jazz. They need that in their diet, but they are probably more of a herbivore species than they are an omnivore. So they need a very high fiber diet. If they don't get it, my guess is that basically their intestines stop working on a long enough time frame. So make sure to give them a lot of things like nori. Fresh algae will obviously be even better if you can find it and source it. Flake foods, which contain a lot of algae, is also a good option. Just make sure that a lot of the food that enters the Moorish idol is somehow plant-based. They will do much better for you long term. One other thing, which I've always had luck with, is feeding them something that contains sponge. And I do this in a couple of different ways. The main way I feed sponge is that I feed my fish angel formula, which contains sponge, which is part of their natural diet and might be something that they really do need. I also keep some live rock in my sump and basically in a cryptic zone. And that stuff, on a long enough time frame, gets covered in sponge. So I rotate those pieces into my display tanks, just to make sure that they get some actual live sponge as well in their diet. There used to be a very good option from a European manufacturer called Dietary. They made both sponge pellets and polyp pellets. Unfortunately, those options are now discontinued. Well, get on Pantary's case. They are on Instagram, so keep badgering them about these pellets, and maybe they'll start making them again. I love those pellets. It was a very convenient way to feed sponge to your fish. In terms of tank size, I'd probably say that you need somewhere around 600 to 1,000 liters to keep a Moorish idol long term. If it's basically a solitary fish and it's just a bunch of smaller fish in it, you could probably get away with a 600-liter tank. But if you want to keep it with a lot of other tanks and angelfish, yeah, definitely 1,000 liters and above. 1,000 liters, I believe, is around 265 gallons US. They also need high flow, seems to reduce stress in most fish. So I'd also advise you guys to, crank up the flow if you want to keep Moorish idols. I see that they get a lot twitchier if you don't have high flow. A common misconception is that these guys can't really be kept with corals, that they are coral killers. Well, as you can see in this tank, I have both SPS and this green slimer. I have tons of zoanthids. I have anemones. I have some sort of a leather coral here. Some mushroom corals here. I have rock flower anemones, Goniopora, a frog spawn. I believe that thing is a Nephtia back there, and a Maxima clam. And as you can see here, it's completely fine with everything. The thing is that if you don't feed these guys properly, they will definitely go for your corals, but that's just because it's starving basically, and it doesn't have any other choices to fulfill its caloric needs. Moorish idols, they burn through food like nothing I've ever seen before. I can't keep weight on these guys unless I feed them a minimum of 3 times a day. So this guy, he gets fed 4 times a day with flake foods and pellets. And then you get a very generous feeding of frozen foods in the evenings. I also put in a clip of nori in here most days, so that's an additional feeding. And that's one of the things that you really do need to make sure that you are keeping a track of and are able to supply them with is a very high feeding frequency. I'd say that's probably one of the very most important things about keeping a Moorish idol, keeping them well fed. And I do this by using a auto feeder. I always use these Eheim ones. Let's see here. Drops about that much food 4 times a day. That's just for shits and giggles. So let's feed them a bit more. And let's see here what happens as soon as it sees that there's some food entering the tank. As you can see here, it feeds quite readily on prepared foods. And it's quite nice and fat, and this is what a Moorish idol is supposed to look like. Now, do I recommend a Moorish idol for just anyone? Hell no. This is a fish for the experienced aquarium keeper. You need to have some years in the hobby before attempting this fish. Anything but that would be quite irresponsible. But it can definitely be done, and they are one of the quintessential reef fish in my opinion. The colors, the streamer on them, they're just beautiful, and I would want to keep a reef tank without a Moorish idol. I just love them. You can't really keep them in groups in reef tanks unless you get like 10 of them or something. A lot of people have attempted to keep them in pairs. What usually happens is that they turn on each other within 6 months or something, and they kill each other off. Which is a hell of a shame, because it would be really cool to have a pair of Moorish idols in a reef tank, but I wouldn't try to keep 2 of them, honestly. And I believe that's about it for Moorish idols, really. They are stunning fish, and they can definitely be kept in reef tanks, but you do need some consideration to do so. So just to summarize, if you really want to have success with Moorish idols and give you the best chances of success possible, you pick the right specimen, you pick one from Kenya, and when you bring it home, you have a separate conditioning tank. One trick I forgot to mention is keep the temperature of the conditioning tank slightly lower, around say 23 degrees or so, because that will slow their metabolic rate somewhat. And if they are difficult feeders initially, that will buy you some time. Make sure to feed them a varied diet, but it should be plant-based, so a lot of stuff which contains fiber. Also, feed them with stuff containing sponge. Don't introduce them into a tank that has tons of boisterous fish, because they can't handle stress very well. And if you are attempting this, make sure to section off a part of that tank so they have an easier transition period, so the other fish can get used to them. Keep them in a large enough tank, at least 600 liters, with good flow, and the most important part, feed them heavily. If your Moorish idol is feeding but it's still skinny, you're not feeding enough. In my view, all these benthic fish, they should be fed at least 4 times a day, because that matches their natural behavior. And if you say that, oh, I can't feed that much because my nitrates or phosphorus will just shoot through the roof, well, get better export, get better filtration, or don't get a Moorish idol or any other of these fish that really do require frequent feedings. I'm sorry, but if you're not willing to get better filtration or do more water changes so you can really keep these guys well fed, well, this fish isn't for you. They are banner fish, what are they called? Heliocus or something like that. I believe the trade name is like poor man's Moorish idol. Then those will be a much better option than the real deal. But if you wish to keep a Moorish idol, just make sure that you're up for the challenge. They are by no means impossible to keep. You can keep them just fine if you just give them the conditions to thrive. Now, I can't wait to see this guy in a bigger tank. I think he's way too cramped in here. So yeah, it's going to be some exciting times. Breaking down my entire reef system is going to be a pain in the ass. I haven't decided on tank placement yet or what kind of tank I'm going with. So yeah, some stuff is still up in the air, and I need to order a tank fairly soon so it's ready when I move in. If there are any additional questions that you might have, something that you think that I've missed or something, please post them down in the comments below, and I'll make sure to address them. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It helps me spread the video around. And if you want to see more stuff like this and my coming move and all the documentation around that, and what I'll be doing for a new tank, new lighting, new basically just gear-wise, hit the subscribe button as well, so you can follow along on that journey. Well guys, thank you for watching, happy reefing, and have a good one. Bye!